Hello, in this video I'm going to carry on from where we left off talking about Princess Diana and her marriage to Charles. So a quick recap in case you missed the last video. Prince Charles would be hot and cold with Diana when they were dating. He'd be on the phone to her every day for a week and then ignore her for 3 weeks. And this went on, apparently. And he was also in touch with Camilla. And Princess Diana had been in the room when Camilla had called, and she'd left the room. She'd given them privacy because she thought she should do that. So I've talked about how Diana didn't have strong boundaries, she had weak boundaries, and why that might have been, about how she was emotionally neglected in childhood. Diana had even overheard Prince Charles say to Camilla on the phone, "Whatever happens, I will always love you."
We met 13 times before we got married.
Diana ignored the red flags and got swept up in the fantasy. She chose to believe Charles when he said he would be faithful to her. They rushed into this relationship because Charles was under pressure from the royal family to get married. And so here's another parallel, because in a relationship with a narcissist, they'll tend to rush things. They'll tend to try to pin somebody down. Diana said he once told her he refused to be the only Prince of Wales who didn't have a mistress. From what we know about him, he does seem to have been lacking in empathy, to be capable of being cold and mean, and to have been dishonest with his affair and arrogant. Charles didn't seem emotional. He seemed to have a stiff upper lip. We looked at some footage that showed us that Charles seemed to be in control of the relationship. It seemed that he thought it would be on his terms. And if Diana had remained the shy young girl in awe of Charles, always following his lead, without needing much from him emotionally, then I think Charles might have been happy with that. But she turned out to be needier than most people because of her background, and he turned out to be more distant and probably more cold than most people, because not only was he in love with somebody else, but also because of his background. It looked like Charles lacked the emotional support he needed growing up. He was also packed off to boarding school when he was a child, and he didn't see much of his parents. They were often away touring around different countries. Sally Bedell-Smith wrote a book about Prince Charles, and she says that Charles was often belittled by his father's forceful personality. And that this was because he was worried that Charles was too soft. But then he ended up being quite a bully. And Charles was sensitive, and so this was really difficult for him. Being bullied by his father, being seen as a bit wet, not a proper boy. I can imagine that he might have felt like maybe he wasn't a proper man. So with all of that attention on Diana, it might have made him feel inadequate. It might have reminded him of those feelings he had with his dad. He might have felt like less of a man, like he was being humiliated.
We'd be going round, and all you could hear was, "Oh, she's on the other side." Now if you're a man, like my husband, proud man, you mind about that if you hear it every day for 4 weeks.
Ken Lennox was a photographer who took this photo of Diana in Australia, and he said that it would be typical of Charles to look the other way when Diana was crying. And this photo shows how hard it was for Diana at first to deal with all of this attention. Sally Bedell-Smith thinks Diana wasn't just upset at how overwhelming the attention was, but also at how Charles reacted to her getting all of this attention. But she ended up, of course, doing really well with it. She was a star. She was loved and adored by the public. That meant so much to her because she was so lonely in the marriage. And I think, as I've said, that this loneliness would have been there since childhood. So it was really important to her to have this connection with the public. And he was going to be king one day. So that attention should have been his. He would have grown up to expect that. So it would be natural that he might be feeling a bit inadequate at this time, at least a bit inadequate, and maybe disappointed that he wasn't getting the attention he'd expected to, or that his mother would normally get. So Charles had been taught not to be exactly what Diana was, emotional and vulnerable. That had been looked down on by his father. And now here is this emotional and vulnerable person who's getting all of the attention. After he's spent all of these years of his life going to these different royal events, doing all the right things that he's been told to do. So it would have felt really frustrating, and I imagine he felt undermined. This is a much more extreme example. It's not a case of some of his friends liking his new bride, but the whole of the general public being in love with her. It still had the same impact. There's still one person who's jealous and the other person who's getting all of this positive attention, but wants some of it from her husband as well. And his jealousy would have felt punishing, like she'd done something wrong, when really all she was doing was her best. She was doing the best she could in the role she'd been given. And she was in that role because she'd wanted to marry him, because she wanted to be with him. And now he was feeling negative feelings towards her because this had all been a success. So the equivalent with a narcissist would be that they would get jealous when their partner is getting on with their friends. And so their partner might be making this big effort to get on with their friends because of how much they want the relationship to work. And yet the narcissist can hold this against them.
I don't think the concerns about Camilla ever stopped. She was aware things had been going on. The staff all knew. Everybody knew. Everybody knew where he was going. So she didn't know who to trust.
He was, of course, in a really difficult position himself because he wanted to be with somebody who had married someone else. And maybe he never would have married Diana if he hadn't been under all this pressure from the royal family to get married. So he was in a difficult position, and I don't know if we could say that he is a narcissist. I really don't know enough about him to say that. But the whole situation ended up creating those same feelings, I think, in Diana as she would have experienced if she had been a regular person who wasn't in the royal family but was in an abusive relationship. Because then, with this suffering, with being in this marriage where she loved Charles but he didn't feel the same way, and going to these different royal events and feeling like an outsider, she was a very different person to other people in the royal family. And that was something that there was jealousy about, because she could connect with the public in a way that they couldn't.
My whole life had changed, turned upside down. It was isolating. You had to either sink or swim. If I tripped up, which invariably I did, because I was new at the game, a ton of bricks came down on me.
That's when she told me that she was bulimic. It was pure pressure, stress.
You could see her fading physically. It was clear to all those who knew her that the bulimia was a reaction to the circumstances she found herself in.
It was her way of trying to have some kind of feeling of control. And then this was used against her. So people found out that she was bulimic, and then they described this as a kind of madness that she had. And they pointed to this as being why maybe the marriage wasn't working out. And this is something else that happens when you're being abused by a narcissist, is, when you react, they use your reaction against you. So in reality, she was reacting to an extremely difficult situation, and she didn't have her own tools with which to deal with this situation, because she had been neglected emotionally when she was a child. So all she could do was turn to an eating disorder for comfort. And so when she reacted to the abuse, that was pointed to rather than the reason she was left feeling so low. And a narcissist will do that, so they will abuse somebody and then they'll point to the person's reaction to the abuse. And they'll try to make that the big thing to invalidate the other person, to show everyone, look, this person's the problem. Look how unreasonable and crazy they're being. So there was no acknowledgement of what maddening behaviour this was, to marry someone when you're still in love with somebody else. And how difficult that would be for the person, the very young person at the other end of this.
Everybody knew about the bulimia in the family, and they all blamed the failure of the marriage on the bulimia. And that's taken some time to get them to think differently. I said I was rejected, I didn't think I was good enough for this family, so I took it out on myself.
Diana was apparently afraid of losing her children. So if she had separated from Prince Charles, there was this threat in her mind that the Queen could take custody of the children because she was allowed to do that by law. And that reminds me as well of a situation with a narcissist where the other person might be afraid that they won't get to have custody of the children, that maybe the other person will, or that at the very least it will be shared custody and the child will have to spend time with this person on their own. They won't be there to protect the child. So again, there's a parallel there. They were pretending to be this great couple in public, but behind closed doors, it wasn't like that. And that again mirrors an abusive relationship, where they put on this great show, where even the person who's being abused doesn't want their friends or family to know what's really going on, because they don't want them to dislike their partner who they still love. In this case, it was all for the royal family, because they needed to look like this perfect royal couple. But apparently later on, it wasn't just because of that. It was also because Diana loved Charles. So when she knew that he was seeing Camilla, she kept it a secret for quite a long time. And that was apparently because of her love for Charles. Now, I don't know if that's true. I think it was Paul Burrell who said that. I looked at... I've seen about 3 documentaries about this recently, because I watched the Netflix series and then I just had to start watching more about Diana. And that's how, I ended up researching for this video by watching all of this stuff. So I think we can see quite a few parallels. Diana was always being humiliated, because Charles loved somebody else. So that would have been a really humiliating experience to go through for so many years. And apparently it was when Harry was born that the relationship really deteriorated. It was soon after that. So that's a lot of years for her to go through this, feeling humiliated, feeling like she's on the outside of the family, and having this jealous husband, and feeling isolated and alone, being pointed out as being the mad, crazy one, the reason everything went wrong. I think all of these are things that someone who's been in an abusive relationship can relate to, because they're all factors that play into abusive relationships. The other person doesn't have to be in love with someone else for the abused person to feel humiliated. Being abused over and over again is a humiliating experience. And then being pointed to as mad, all this gaslighting for reacting in a very normal way, given the circumstances, that can in itself be, the most maddening experience. And that's what Diana went through. It wasn't just Charles that was doing this. And I don't even know to what extent he was doing this, but it was the royal family. And also some members of the public who saw her as this really crazy, neurotic person. People didn't really talk about mental health problems at that time. It was still very new, especially in England, where there was still this stiff upper lip going on. It's actually only recently that the royal family have started talking about mental health issues, thanks to William and Harry. So I'm going to leave it here. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.